In 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
On February,
that was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Do you still think so?
That is a ridiculous question.
Under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld is a fair question. I just want to follow up to see if enough has been done to protect Americans at harm's way. The day of the strike, your department issued a warning against all U.S. citizens to depart Iraq immediately. Was there a concern before or after the strike that Americans could be targeted for retaliation?
We've known that Americans traveling not only in Iraq.
Sir, yes or no would be
yes,
sufficient.
but the answer is a little.
I know, but we don't really have that much time. So, did you warn?
I need to be accurate,
sir.
Yeah,
did you?
I apologize
did you
for my
warn
efforts
the
to be
embassy
accurate.
either before or after the attack?
The embassy was completely in the loop as we were working through not only hours,
Okay,
days, but
the
months.
people at the embassy who are the ones in harm's way said that they were not warned. I hope you're not saying that they're lying. Sir, were you not aware that Americans might be targeted by this assassination and be retaliated against?
Oh, the threat from the Islamic Republic is now 40 years on.
All right. Well, I ask this because Brian Hook, your special representative on Iran, received extra security at a speech in Los Angeles after the attack, not in Baghdad. Los Angeles. Mr. Hook got protection from diplomatic security, the LAPD, and counter-assault team. Look, I think making sure our public servants have proper security is incredibly important. But I have to ask, if we were so much safer after the strike, why did a U.S. diplomat need counter-assault team to protect him at a speech in California?
Yes, it's undoubtedly the case that we are all safer. There are distributional elements to this. That is, there are certain persons who made certain decisions that might be more at risk. But let me assure you, cumulatively, the American people are far more safer.
If you are claiming that Americans are safer after this attack, apparently your department disagrees, at least as far as Mr. Hook and our embassy in Baghdad are concerned. I yield back. Some scholars and practitioners of foreign policy have questioned whether sanctions are effective at changing the behaviors of certain governments. There's also a perception that sanctions are easily avoidable by the rich and the powerful, that individuals that we target in using those sanctions. So I wanted to ask you, do you believe that there is a risk in enacting sanctions because of the real and perceived harm done to the people of the country? Is it possible that the use of sanctions undercuts our national security by furthering anti-Americanism in the countries we target with sanctions?
Sanctions do often are the tool of choice for the obvious reasons, but I do think they need to be assessed in terms of whom they really affect.
Over the weekend, both the New York Times and Washington Post reported that August 29th drone strike that supposedly prevented a car bomb attack at the airport in Kabul, instead killed Samari Ahmadi, an aid worker, and his family. The strike happened when there was a lot of eyes on Kabul, but it's not unusual for US drone strikes to kill civilians. It is not unusual for the US government to claim it killed terrorists instead. And this is coming on the heels of reporting that DoD failed to spend a single dollar of the redress payments that Congress has provided for civilian casualties. As Congress considers the continuing utility of the 2001 AUMF, how can you possibly ensure us that our drone strikes and over-the-horizon capabilities will actually reach their targets?
With regard to the drone strike that you're referring to, that is being looked at very, very, very carefully.
Your role and previous roles in other administrations, how much of an analysis is being done to look at whether our counterterrorism efforts are actually being counter to the work that we are trying to do in ending terrorism around the world?
I would call it very, very significant.
If you can go back a little bit to Eritrea, I previously talked to you about the possibility of Somali troops being trained there. I know when we previously spoke, you said you couldn't confirm. It has now been confirmed that there are 5,000 Somali soldiers that have been trained. The president of Somalia says he doesn't have the resources to bring them back. Is there a role for the United States to assist? I know that the ask was made.
That subject is under discussion and also discussion with other regional and international partners, such as the Emiratis and the Qataris and the Turks, who you know are also engaged in providing security assistance to Somalia.
Is there an assessment being done on whether they participated in any of the atrocities that we
There are
speak of?
efforts underway to determine that, but as you know, we have very limited visibility or opportunity to understand exactly what's happening in Eritrea.
A reporter's job is to find the objective truth about what's happening and report it to the public. You have an enormous audience at the Times of India, and you have an enormous responsibility to get it right. I'm aware of how the narrative shaped by reporting can distort the truth. I'm also very aware of how it could be limited to sharing only the official side of the story. The press at its worst when it is a mouthpiece for a government. In your version of the story, the only problems in Kashmir are caused by what you call militants. The only people protesting to break away from India and are all nefariously backed by Pakistan. You also make the incredible dubious claim that the Indian government's crackdown in Kashmir is good for human rights. If it was good for human rights, Ms. Singh, it wouldn't be happening in secret. You make what I might call a feminist case for the occupation of Kashmir and the communication shutdowns, saying it would be better for women. Dr. Chatterjee, as the co-chair of the Initiative of Conflict, Gender, and People's Rights at the University of California, Berkeley, I would say you might be an expert on this particular issue. Do you agree with Ms. Singh's assertion that what's happening in Kashmir since August has been good for women's rights?
No, absolutely not. As you said yourself, if it were good for anybody, we would announce it. It would be announced to the world.
Mr. Robinson, is it true that combating impunity and building up the rule of law in Central America is a priority for the United States?
Yes, it is.
Are you familiar with the 2012 DEA operation in Honduras that we call Operation Anvil, and many Hondurans call the Awas massacre?
I am.
In this operation, American DEA agents participated in an operation that resulted in the murder of 4 indigenous Hondurans including a pregnant woman. The Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, which you lead today, provided operational support, including the helicopters from which the fatal rounds were fired from. We are not talking about the massacres that are well known that occurred in Guatemala and El Salvador in the 80s, but we are talking about something that took place in 2012. In 2017, a report by the Inspectors General of the State Department and Justice found that the DEA was not only involved in the shooting, but lied to both Congress and the State Department to cover it up. That report also found that the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Agency, which you lead, was involved in both the massacre and the cover-up. You were in the INL in 2012 when the massacre happened, and you were the ambassador to Guatemala in 2017 when the OIG report came out. What was your involvement during the massacre and the investigation?
I gave a testimony, I would suspect. I don't remember.
And is it accurate to say that you had direct involvement in this massacre?
I would say that there were a number of us in the Bureau who knew the operation was going on and were supporting both the embassy and the other agency in this operation.
So you were indirectly involved but didn't have a direct involvement in the actual massacre, is what you're saying?
Well, having direct involvement in the actual massacre would put me in a boat, I think, in a river in Honduras. So in that respect, no. But as the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the time, I was involved in the planning of the operation.
Mm-hmm. And to your knowledge, what were the consequences for the individuals that were involved in this massacre? Were either Americans or Hondurans charged and convicted of the crime?
I would have to go back and look at the record.
I'll refresh your memory. Only one Honduran was charged but was acquitted to this day. There are no people who have been held actually accountable for that massacre. Do you know if there is any compensation or reparations provided to the victims of this massacre?
I don't know.
And so in your role, and again to our previous question about combating impunity and pushing for the rule of law, how can we have credibility when there has been impunity for Americans and Hondurans and others involved in the Northern Triangle who have had agents who murder with impunity? Ms. Fee, we recently announced a travel ban on some African nations. The South African president has called the decision completely unjustifiable. We know that it was South Africa that sequenced this new variant, and instead of lauding them for this achievement, it appears that we are punishing them. How are you messaging this to the region, and what responses are you all giving to the president, and how are you justifying the fact that we have not banned other countries outside of Africa that also have this variance in their countries?
Thank you for the question. We value greatly our health partnerships with African countries, particularly South Africa.
I just want to hear how diplomatically you are talking to them about this. I do know that we value their relationship.
Well, I just meant that in the context of our engagement, Secretary Blinken called the foreign minister following this decision to make clear to her that the decision was taken out of an abundance of caution and to publicly praise the role of South African side.
Why isn't that abundance of caution taken for the other countries outside of the African countries that we've banned that also have the variants?
That's an important question which I'm not best situated to answer.